So, as I said, I'm a program manager lead. I'm in the mobility group of the Exchange team, and today's session is about unified messaging in Microsoft Office 365. I'm going to do a quick introduction where I'll go through unified messaging from a great height. I assume that most of you are somewhat familiar with UM. If anyone isn't at all familiar with Exchange UM, could you just raise your hand? I might pause a bit. Okay, so I won't spend very much time on that. Then I'll talk about the architecture and configuration that we use to get UM working in Office 365, and then a section on operation, including a feature comparison with the on-premise version of Exchange UM, and some talk about migrating UM-enabled mailboxes and high availability, and then I'll wrap up. One of the reasons for offering this session was that the idea of voicemail in the cloud seems very attractive. However, the phrase the cloud is very nebulous. I mean, everything's got to be somewhere, and saying it's in the cloud doesn't really answer many questions. In fact, we used to deduct points and have small forfeits at team meetings when people would say in the cloud. They were forced to define what they were talking about. So I hope by the end of this talk you're going to have enough precision to know what, if somebody waves their hands and talks about unified messaging in the cloud, to know what they're talking about. So here's the introduction. Exchange Online Unified Messaging, like Exchange Unified Messaging, has got a lot of benefits for people who are currently running email and voicemail. From the point of view of the user, the benefits are they get anywhere access. Their voicemail is accessible from any Exchange client. They get a nice built-in media player rendering in Outlook and Outlook Web App. Outlook Voice Access is the subscriber interface, which is a speech-enabled or touch-tone-enabled interface to Exchange and Active Directory. We have Voicemail Preview in Exchange 2010 UM, which produces text versions of voicemails as they arrive. And other features such as call answering rules, where users can set up custom greetings according to who's calling them or when they're being called, and give the caller the option of doing things like transferring to another number or perhaps finding the user on their mobile phone, which is thus accessible to the caller without the caller knowing the number. So users love UM because it gives them a lot of convenience. For the organization, the main advantage that we stress is the lower cost of ownership compared to running separate voicemail and email systems. There's a single infrastructure for transporting and storing messages. There's a single management infrastructure and identity infrastructure that's all based around Active Directory and PowerShell, and a single set of administration tools that the administrators are probably already familiar with when they come to UM. And of course, if you take an Office 365 subscription, compared to running Exchange UM on your own premises, the infrastructure is provided, and the upgrades and patches and so on just happen automatically, so you save correspondingly. So you have a nice kind of happy confluence of savings here, firstly over voicemail and email separately, and secondly over running and managing your own infrastructure. So from the 10,000-foot view, UM provides hosted voicemail. We answer calls if the user doesn't pick up their phone and deposit a voice message in their Exchange inbox. Outlook Voice Access, you can call up and check messages and access your calendar, call people in your personal contacts. And Automated Attendant gives callers to your company the ability to find people and reach people even if they don't know their telephone number. In terms of the architecture at a very high level, and I'm going to gradually during the talk dive down into lower levels of the architecture, the customer's premises are on the left and the Microsoft data center running Office 365 services is on the right. We have unified messaging along with the other Exchange roles somewhere out in that data center. And on the customer's premises, we have a black box that represents a telephony solution. To be clear, UM Online, in exactly the same way as UM on customer's premises, requires dial tone. It's not in itself a telephony solution, it's just an endpoint. It's a voicemail system, if you like. So the customer has to provide the dial tone, and the dial tone is provided, as it would be if the customer was running UM on their own premises, by link or by a PBX and IP gateway that are compatible with Exchange UM. So I haven't put any details on there. That's just a black box connected to the public telephone network somehow. The bit that's new, of course, is the bit in the middle, which is the voice over IP network border elements, and the public IP network over which the voice traverses between the customer's premises and the Microsoft data center, and I'll have a lot more to say about that later. is part of Office 365 for enterprises. It's currently not part of the Office 365 for professional offers, and it's in the E3 and E4 plans. So what I'm going to be talking about here is Office 365 for enterprises, and actually more specifically the E3 plan, where the customer has a PBX or link on their premises and is in the data center. All right, now to get down to the next level of detail. So here's a customer, Fabricam, one of our apocryphal companies, and they're running Lync as their voice solution. So the picture looks rather similar to the one I just showed you, except I've put a little more detail, although this is still, understand, a cartoon architecture. It's not intended to be a real deployment diagram. So Fabricam have their own IP network, and there are Lync servers and a voice over IP gateway connected to that private IP network. They have, at the edge of their network, a Lync edge server role, which has been deployed for network traversal of signaling and media. And that could be used, of course, if they have Lync users who are working from home or from behind network address translation. is in the data center, and you can see that the data center also has a Lync edge server pool, which is dedicated to traffic to and from online. Now, Lync server is actually required here. Online can't be used as a voicemail solution for OCS 2007 or 2007 R2. All of the roles must be Lync, and the edge role included must be Lync Server 2010. The reason for this is that the Lync team introduced the idea of hosted voicemail in Lync 2010. It's not present in earlier versions. And this manifestation of hosted voicemail shows up as a Lync configuration object called a hosted voicemail policy. You can have multiple hosted voicemail policies, but a hosted voicemail policy is an object that offers an extra level of indirection for voicemail routing. When Lync decides that it's time to send the call to voicemail for a user or a contact, it looks to see if the user has a hosted voicemail policy associated with them, and if so, it follows the addresses and the instructions that are on that hosted voicemail policy. I'll describe that more later, and then routes the call. Again, be clear, Lync for enterprise voice here is on the customer's premises. So now let's take a look at a couple of other customers who are not using Lync. They're using IPPBXs or TDM, time division multiplex PBXs. So here are two more fictitious companies, Contoso and Northwind Traders. And Contoso, I'll start with, they have a TDM PBX. They have it connected via some telephony signaling protocol, T1, or even digital set emulation, perhaps, to a voice over IP gateway. And then that's connected through their private network to a network border element that I've here labeled Session Border Controller, which manages the traversal of signaling and media to and from the public IP network. Northwind Traders, they have an IP PBX of a kind that has a supported all IP integration with already. And so they don't need the voice over IP gateway, but they do need the Session Border Controller at the edge of their network. And as you can see, the Microsoft Data Center, we have Session Border Controller also. So the interoperability story, usually the first question that customers ask me after they've decided that is something they should be interested in is, will it work with my PBX? And of course, there are many, many makes and models of PBX. So in order to answer that question, first step is to go to the Telephony Advisor. That's a hyperlink in the deck. But you can actually just go to your favorite internet search engine and type in Exchange Unified Messaging Telephony Advisor. And you'll see there a list of the PBXs and the voice over IP gateways that have been tested with Exchange 2010 and for which we have configuration notes published, and you're free to download the configuration notes. The configuration notes tell you how to configure your PBX and cable up the gateway and configure the gateway, if necessary, to talk to Session Border Controllers are the bit of the picture that's entirely new for Office 365 We have a public IP network in the middle, So the voice, and that means both the signaling and the media that travels between Contoso or Northwind and Online is traveling across networks that are not managed by Contoso or Northwind or Microsoft. They're traveling over public IP networks. And so it's important to realize that putting any kind of equipment on a public network interface is a risky business, and not all equipment, not all voice over IP equipment is intended to be put on a public network interface. There are all kinds of ingenious denial of service attacks, some of them voice over IP specific. And it's to guard against these and to provide the necessary level of hardening and security that we require the use of session border controllers. The session border controller is really acting as a voice over IP proxy and as a firewall, but it has some additional functionality, particularly around what's technically called being a back-to-back user agent, where in some cases sends a refer, which is a transfer, and the SBC actually adds value by doing some translation on that. SBCs offer lots and lots of features. Online does not actually use a lot of the features, but it does require the presence of the SBC. So, what SBCs do we work with? Again, we have an interoperability test plan, and we've worked with the vendors who are listed here ourselves to test and validate these devices as network border elements for connecting to Online. Now, this list is this is the initial list. The list will grow over time, and the vendors whom you see here, the partners, have multiple makes and models in many cases of SBCs, and not all of them appear on the list, but we expect both the product and version numbers to grow over time as we add more devices from these partners, and also to see perhaps new vendors come along and do interoperability testing through our third-party program, part of the Microsoft Unified Communications Open Interoperability Program. Why do we need to do this testing? Because unlike some other uses of SBCs, such as SIP trunking, has some very particular requirements for call flows. It does things like send message waiting indicator as SIP notify messages. And it does that without having an outstanding subscription from that endpoint. So it says, turn on the lamp for extension 31590, and no previous registration for that extension has been made by And so not all SBCs support all of the call flows that needs to be the voicemail system operating at a distance. And where we haven't been able to verify that all of the call flows work, or we know that some of them don't, we haven't added the device to the list. So if you don't see your favorite vendor or your favorite SBC on the list, it could be because they haven't tested with us yet, or they've tested and we found that for one reason or another they don't meet the requirements. I can say a couple more things about the SBCs. Firstly, the capacity, that's the number of concurrent sessions or concurrent calls that can pass through the SBC, is variable. Some are at the low end of the spectrum, and some are at the high end, where you can have thousands of concurrent sessions passing through the SBCs. To give you some idea how this translates into your organization, which is usually the next question, how many of these things do I need to buy? How many concurrent sessions do I need to license? The number of enabled mailboxes that are supported per concurrent session varies. But for typical, and by typical I mean fairly light these days, voicemail usage, you can get about 100 enabled mailboxes supported by a single concurrent call. If that sounds surprisingly high, bear in mind that most people don't get more than 1 or 2 voice messages a day. Those 1 or 2 voice messages a day don't last more than about 30 seconds each. And so there's the length of time that the call is being used on behalf of a particular user is very small. So many, many users can actually have calls spread out over the day. So somewhere between 30 and 100. If you multiply those numbers, you can see that the very smallest SBC, which can be licensed down to 5 concurrent sessions, should support somewhere between 150 and 500 enabled mailboxes. And the largest one, which goes up to 8,000, well, we're talking there about 800,000 enabled users. So that's an exceptionally large organization, probably bigger than any of the organizations in Office 365 at the moment. But we have at the moment devices that cover the entire range, and as I say, we expect to add more devices over time. So why would one choose a particular make and model of SBC? I'm not going to offer advice here, but I will say that you can see that some of the SBCs are available in a form factor where they act both as SBC and as voice over IP gateway, although that's optional. So if you discover from our telephony advisor that you need to get a gateway from a particular vendor, and that vendor also offers SBC functionality in the device, it seems to me to be a pretty good choice to do that rather than mixing and matching the SBCs and voice over IP gateways from different vendors. It's a simpler support story, but every customer's situations are different, and ultimately the choice is yours. It shouldn't ultimately matter. So I'm going to walk through now, before I do my demonstration, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to show you, and I'm going to do this by going step by step through what it takes to connect up to Online if you're a customer like Contoso, who's got a PBX and a voice over IP gateway. I'll talk about Lync later on. The steps are essentially the same, would be the same for Northwind traders with their IP PBX. So where I show on this diagram the PBX and voice over IP gateway, you could replace those in your own mind by an IP PBX, and essentially the steps are exactly the same. So what happens? The first thing that happens is that we, Microsoft, pre-configure our servers to send calls to session border controllers in our data center and vice versa. So that's already been taken care of. That is nothing that Contoso needs to do. Contoso then needs to connect and configure their voice over IP gateway with their PBX, as they would have to do if was online, and I put another link to the telephony advisor in there. They then need to connect up the SBC to their private network and configure the gateway to communicate with the SBC. The SBC, being an edge device, is dual-homed. It has two interfaces for voice over IP. It has an internal interface that talks on Contoso's network, and it has an external interface that talks on the public IP network. And it acts, as I said, as a proxy and a voice over IP-aware router between those two network interfaces. We require the use of CA-signed certificates for communication between the SBC and Online. We don't want and won't permit, in fact, customers to send unsecured, unencrypted traffic between their premises and Online. So more specifically, we require the use of SIP over TLS, Transport Layer Security, and its mutual Transport Layer Security, and SRTP. And all of the gateways and SBCs that we've certified are capable of operating in this mode. We need the customer will need to get a CA-signed certificate of the correct type. So in the configuration notes that we're publishing for the SBCs, we list the certificate authorities that we currently work with, and you get a standard SSL style certificate. You request a standard SSL style certificate from that CA. The important thing is that the name, the CN field in that certificate, must contain what will be the fully qualified domain name of the external interface of your SBC. So you can see there where I've got umsbc.contoso.com. That's what the Contoso administrator has chosen to use for the address of the external interface of the SBC. That name, umsbc.contoso.com, must appear in the CN of the certificate that they get from the CA and that they load into their device. There are a couple of other requirements about loading a root certificate and intermediate certificates if there's a certificate chain, and those are described in the configuration notes also. And of course, the administrator has to add a public DNS entry for that SBC so that it can be found by Online when it goes and does a DNS lookup on umsbc.contoso.com. Now, if all that seems a little challenging, we have systems integrators who have actually come to hands-on training by the Exchange team, and Microsoft has a large number of voice partners who can definitely assist with these steps. Cabling up a gateway to a PBX is not something that every customer feels comfortable about attempting And essentially the same specialists in many cases who can assist with on-premises deployments can assist with connecting to Online. So having got the on-premises equipment sorted out, the Contoso administrator then goes to the control panel and creates a dial plan object. And if you're familiar with Exchange these terms will already mean something to you, and a mailbox policy and a IP gateway. They configure the IP gateway object to represent the SBC. In other words, they give it a name that matches the address of that SBC on their own premises. So this is how is going to find it. Yes, a question?
How do we identify systems integrator?
We have a list of systems integrators that we published for Exchange 2007, which we've carried forward. Link voice partners have also, at least some of them had training, and we're going to be publishing, along with the configuration notes, a list of the specialists who specifically had training for Online. But we feel that over time, a lot of the systems integrators in, for example, the Link Voice Specialized Partner Program will develop these skills, particularly for Link installs, but also for other systems.
So through the Microsoft partner?
Yes. Yes. So next, you need to configure the SBC to talk to Online. Having set up the objects in Online, all of the infrastructure is ready over there. And it's interesting, it's wrapped rather unusually, but the IP gateway object that you create online has an address, and it's called the forwarding address. And you take that forwarding address, which is created for you, you don't have to type it in, and then you transfer that to the SBC's forwarding rules, and you say, every time you want to send any traffic to Online, send it here. All of these addresses are of the same form. They all end with .outlook.com, and they all begin with a globally unique ID, which is a 32-character sequence of numbers, letters, and dashes. So there's an example. Not very friendly, but you only need to put this into the SBC once. So this globally unique ID at the left of the address uniquely identifies the calling organization, Contoso in this case, to the Online service. Okay? So that's why it's important to put it in the rules. This is how Online knows it's a call coming from Contoso and not someone else. Having done all this, the administrator can go ahead and enable the user's mailboxes, and then they're good to go. So, to try and put a little bit more flesh on these bones, I'm now going to demonstrate configuration and use of in Office 365. So the setup that I've got today, I have, of course, this is a session, so I have a phone on the podium. That's connected up to the conference PBX, and then via the wonderful public telephone network, we'll communicate with PBX that we have in Redmond, Washington. We have a voice-over IP gateway hooked up to that PBX. And then that, through our own internal network, communicates with a session border controller. The session border controller is sending the calls over the public IP network. We don't have anything special set up here. And the calls are going to go to one of two data centers where we're currently running in North America. We use GeoDNS to do the lookup. So in this region, if you take anything of the form guid.outlook.com, what you will get back from DNS is the addresses of the session border controllers in North America. And these are the two data centers at the moment. Okay, let me just switch over to the demo machine. Here we are. And if this is a little small, I can zoom in. So if you're having trouble reading it, and I'm not zooming in enough, jump up and down and wave your hands, and I will try to accommodate you by making things more readable. So from the Office 365 front page, I log in, and I go to Options, and because I'm a administrator, I choose to manage my organization. So let me just zoom in a bit here. So you can see on the Exchange control panel that we now have a tab that says Phone and Voice. If I can show that there, Phone and Voice. So if you're in the E3 plan, you will see the phone and voice tab. And when you go to it, you will see, let me just zoom in again, a couple of vertical tabs marked dial plans and IP gateways. So all of the configuration for Online is being done here through the Exchange control panel, and that is something new. So what I'm going to do is just demonstrate what it takes to make a new dial plan. So I'm going to make a new dial plan, pretending I'm the Contoso administrator. And I'll call this Contoso PBX users, something like that. That's just a name. And I'll put in an extension length. Any of you who are administrators for on-premises systems will recognize all of these steps, although the interface looks a little bit different. The dial plan URI type, in this case, it's going to be telephone extension, because we've got a TDM PBX and voice over IP gateway that sends the extension number with the diversion information. If this were going to be a link dial plan, I would choose SIP URI. So telephone extension. The dial plan language is going to be English United States, but you'll notice that we have all 26 language packs available in all regions. So you can choose a different dial plan if you like. And then country or region code is 1. Okay, so I have a new dial plan. That was easy. That's about as easy as it could reasonably be. And if I go and look at the properties on that dial plan, you'll see that we've taken the opportunity, if you compare and contrast this with the Exchange Management Console interface for on-premises you'll see we've taken the opportunity to make a few improvements. So for example, things like mailbox policies and auto attendance are now nested inside the dial plan, so we don't have separate tabs for those. There's a logical relationship between mailbox policies and dial plans, and between auto attendance and dial plans, and we've expressed this now by doing this kind of containment. You can see, in fact, that the Management Console automatically created a whole new mailbox policy for me without me having to ask. So I have a default mailbox policy. And when I enable users, it will be with a mailbox policy. So that's a very quick look at the dial plan creation. Let's go over and have a look at IP gateways. And let me create, as the Contoso administrator, a new IP gateway. And let me just zoom in on this a little bit. Okay, so you have to provide a limited amount of information for the IP gateway. So the first thing that I need to do is to give it a name. So I'm going to call it Contoso. Can't spell Contoso. Contoso SBC. That's just to remind me that that is actually a representation of that SBC device at the edge of the Contoso network. We can't actually directly represent any IP PBXs or gateways that might be beyond that. All communication is with this device, so this is what the IP gateway represents. And the address, well, umsbc.contoso.com. That's what is in the DNS record that I've set up, and that is what it better be in the common name in the certificate that I've loaded into that SBC. And then I get to associate the IP gateway with dial plans. So I'll associate it with Contoso PBX users and save out. Okay, well, let me just... yeah, so what it's telling me there is, and something I forgot to do on the demonstration, but is that the IP gateway address I put in there, contoso.com, doesn't correspond to any accepted domain that's configured for this organization. I'm actually using an existing organization, and contoso.com is not an accepted domain there. So what I'll do is, with your permission, I will use, just to show you something, I will use an existing IP gateway object. And all I want to show here is that when I've created my IP gateway object, it has a name, which I give it. It has an address, and this is an actual SBC that we're using in our service for Microsoft users. And it has this new field that's called forwarding address. And the forwarding address is a read-only field. I didn't put it there. It was put there automatically by the system, and I can't change it. And as you can see, it has a globally unique ID at the left, and it finishes with um.outlook.com. So that's the thing that I need as the administrator to transfer to the configuration of the SBC. So that goes back into the on-premises configuration of the SBC rules. All right, so I've got dial plans and an IP gateway set up. Now, what I want to do is to enable myself to be a UM-enabled user. I'm not currently UM-enabled, so let me just look for my user record in the directory. So I go to Users and Groups. I search for Michael Wilson. Here's Michael Wilson. And I'll look at the details for Michael Wilson. And as you can see, there are quite a few fields, and they're broken down into sections. So I've got things like name and display name. And of course, the voice details and phone and voice features are thoughtfully placed right down at the bottom. So here we are. Let me give you a better view of that. And the very last section on the user details is phone and voice features, which will appear in these particular service plans. And you can see the only phone and voice feature we have here at the moment is unified messaging, because that's included in the service plan, and it's disabled for this user. So I'm going to enable Michael for unified messaging. So I click on Enable. First thing I'm asked to do is to specify a UM mailbox policy. So let me pick one. And go to the next step. And then it asks me for an extension number for Michael. Well, because my number is in the directory, my telephone number is already in the telephone number field, UM helpfully takes the last n digits, 5 in this case, of the telephone number and suggests that that's what should be my extension number. And indeed that's fine, so I'm going to leave that setting as is. It's going to automatically generate a numeric PIN for me to log in with, and it's going to require me to reset the PIN the first time I log in. So let me just leave all of those settings at the defaults to give you more of an idea about how the default behavior goes. And I click on Save, and the little wheel goes around, and I'm UM-enabled now. And when I say I'm UM-enabled, how do I know? Well, I have to call, why don't I just call my phone back in Redmond, and you'll hear it divert to UM Online, and you will hear my greeting. I was previously UM-enabled, so there's a greeting I recorded a while ago, but you will get some kind of greeting if you are UM-enabled in New Mailbox. And I'll leave a voice message, and then we'll take the demo on from there. I like these demonstrations because there's always a little bit of suspense. You know, while the phone is ringing, it's like, what's going to happen now? Is it really going to ring over? So ringing in Redmond, going to forwards to Illinois or Texas.
You've reached Michael Wilson's Exchange Labs mailbox. Sorry I can't take your call at the moment. Please leave a message.
After the tone, please record your message. When you finish recording, hang up or press the pound key for more options.
Hello, it's Michael. I'm in Atlanta. Good luck with the presentation. Call me afterwards on 425-555-1234. Thanks. Bye. Okay, so that worked. I'm UM-enabled. Now my calls, and you'll have to take my word for it, I could have cheated. I did not cheat. That call really did go to the PBX in Redmond and then really did go through an SBC and the public IP network to UM in one of those data centers, and I don't know which one. So let's just go back to my mail. In fact, I'll go back to managing myself, and I'll go back to my mail. And you can see here that, oh, did you hear that? I also got a text message. I can talk about that as well if you like. But you can see here that in Outlook Web App, I've got a voicemail that's arrived. And it's, if I actually play from OA, let's see if I can play the voice message. It should be the one that I just recorded. And just make sure that the volume on my speakers is loud enough. Okay, here we go. Hello, it's Michael. I'm in Atlanta. Good luck with the presentation. Call me afterwards on 425-555-1234. Thanks. Bye. So the voicemail preview wasn't exactly right. I did say call me afterwards, but my crazy British accent confused it because it's expecting an American accent, so it didn't get it quite right. However, it got it pretty much right. And as you can see, if I go to Outlook, which has got some slightly more sophisticated handling, not only can I play it by pressing the media control in Outlook, but you can see that it's recognized that it's a phone number. And if I want to make sure that the phone number was picked up correctly, I can just click there and it will play from that position.
555-1234. Thanks. Bye. On 425-555-1234. Thanks. Bye.
Another thing you'll notice is that there's some metadata. Voicemail Preview has figured out that this is a phone number, and so if I were link-enabled, I would have the ability to call that number right back. In fact, if anything is registered for TelURIs, I can call back. So the good news is that, yes, a question.
Is it possible to record the caller number, like call from mobile phone? Is it able to show that?
Yes, I mean, you can see that, for example, for some reason, the PBX here is not generating caller ID. But on calls that I've had recently, you can see that the calling line ID is preserved when we get it. And in fact, if we get the calling line ID and it resolves to a user in Active Directory or my contacts, we'll actually put that person in the field, the sender field. So that's just a UM feature. So I don't want to dwell too much on this because anybody who's running UM on premises today knows that this works and it's goodness. I'm just making the point that this is in the cloud service. And it's, oh dear, dinner's off. Message from my wife, never mind. What I'm going to do is log into Outlook Voice Access and just demonstrate that that works as well. You can see that I got my Welcome to Exchange Unified Messaging, and it's actually got my temporary PIN. Let me just zoom in on that. So I'm going to call that number, and I'm going to log in, and I'll just reset my PIN, and then I'll just do a couple of things to convince you that Outlook Voice Access in the online service works great as well.
To access your mailbox, enter your extension.
Michael Wilson in Exchange Labs.
Please enter your PIN, then press the pound key. PIN expired. You need to change your PIN before you continue. Enter the new PIN now, then press the pound key. To verify your new PIN, please re-enter it and press PIN accepted. Please say voicemail, email, calendar, personal contacts, directory, or personal options.
Voicemail.
Opening your voice mailbox. First saved voice message arrived today at 10:34 a.m.
Hello, it's Michael. I'm in Atlanta. Good luck with the presentation. Call me afterwards on 425-555-1234. Thanks. Bye.
End of message.
Delete
you
message.
Can say message deleted. Next message from
Goodbye.
Reverend Jew. I heard you say goodbye. Do you want to end this phone call?
Yes, please.
Thank you for calling. Goodbye.
The last bit is a good feature if you're driving, by the way. So that's the hands-free hang-up from Outlook Voice Access. So, and you notice that the message got deleted as well. So Outlook Voice Access works great. So let me now go back to managing and show you a little bit more about the organizational features of UM Online, specifically the reporting. So we have reporting, and that arrived in Exchange 2010 SP1, and it's got some special uses in the online service. We have a slightly different interface to it in on-prem. But if I go and I take a look at, why don't I just take a look at user call logs for me? So if I click on the reports and select a user, let me select myself again, because I don't want to be exposing details about what other people's calls have been. But I'm the administrator, so I'm taking a healthy interest in my own calls. Okay, so here they are. Including, it's Pacific time, so that's why things appear to be 3 hours off, including the calls that I've just made. So you saw that there was a voice message called. there was no calling number because the calling line ID is not being presented. And then I called in to Outlook Voice Access to check the messages. So both of those calls are recorded. And you can see caller ID is recorded where we get it. If I open up any one of these calls, here's the Outlook Voice Access call, we have audio quality details. Anybody who's familiar with Link will recognize a lot of these terms. And the ones to look at really are network mean opinion score degradation, NMOS, 0.0. So we did as well as could be expected for the codecs that we're using. And the round trip time here is 83 milliseconds. So that is actually round trip from the on-premises gateway to UM. So 8 milliseconds is longer than you'd expect on your own premises, of course, but UM works just fine up to round trip times of about 500 milliseconds before people start noticing anything. So even though the call was going from here to Redmond and then through an SBC and the public IP network to data centers completely elsewhere, kind of probably came back somewhere near here, we had an 83 millisecond round trip. Audio quality was fine. Everything worked great. So the other kind of report, incidentally, you can copy this report and use it for later analysis. The other kind of report is call statistics. So if I click on the call statistics, by default, we show you the calls for all UM dial plans and all UM IP gateways in your organization. But if you like, you can narrow it down. There's a drop-down list here, and you can just look at calls for a certain UM dial plan or through a certain UM IP gateway if you want to troubleshoot or look at audio quality issues. And again, if I take some day, so let me take yesterday, we got 145 calls in this small test organization. And what you can do with that is to export that day as a CSV file. And so I'm going to save that into this directory. Okay, so I can actually do more slicing and dicing with Excel than I can in the management console. So in Excel, I can go into Excel and open that file that I just saved. And then I'm going to import this. It's delimited. It's a comma-separated file. And so there's all the data exported for all the calls through all the dial plans and IP gateways on that day. Another nice thing that we've done is we have a template which is downloadable, and there is a link in the deck. And you can use that template to interpret the CSV files of the kind that you download, and you get a nice graphical representation of the calls. So here's a sample. It's not today's, but you can see I've already got one up, and it does total calls per hour, average NMOS as a function of time, and things like the top callers and top recipients. This is actually available to online UM administrators as well, and I'd encourage you to try it out if you want to get more of a kind of insight into how UM is handling calls for your users. Okay, so that wraps up the demo section, unless I think of something I want to show later on. So I'm going to go back to the slides now. Pressing the button a little more firmly. So that's the topology, and the reporting template is available from a hyperlink. It's rather long, so I didn't put it on the slide, but you can get it from the slide when you get the copy. All right, now for something very similar. Having done Contoso's hookup to online UM and having demonstrated pretty much how that plays out, if you're a Link customer running Link 2010 on premises and you want to connect to UM Online? As before, we've configured everything, so we have a Link Edge Server pool. It's all pre-configured, so nothing needed there. So the Fabricam Link administrator configures Link for enterprise voice and installs and configures the Link Edge Server role, and there was a session on Link Edge Server earlier on today. Then the Fabricam Link UM administrator running Link goes to the Exchange Control Panel in Office 365 and pretty much as I did just now, creates a UM dial plan and UM mailbox policy. For Link, we don't require them to create a UM IP gateway object. Sorry about that. That's obviously some kind of an alert popping up. We don't require them to create a UM IP gateway object. for reasons that I'll explain a bit more. But it actually simplifies the configuration compared to running with Lync on premises. You just need the dial plan, and you get the mailbox policy created for you. Then the Fabricam Lync administrator, in their Lync setup on premises, has to create or modify the default hosted voicemail policy. And on the hosted voicemail policy, you put two things. The first thing you put is the fully qualified domain name of what is actually the Lync server edge pool in Office 365. Easy thing is, this is always exap.um.outlook.com. So no GUIDs here for Lync administrators. They just set up the hosted voicemail policy, and they make it point to exap.um.outlook.com. Again, we're using GeoDNS, so wherever you are in the world, this is all you have to do. The other thing that you have to configure is the routing domain. So this is going to be the domain that you're using as this for the SIP URIs of your users. If I get a call for Michael at Fabricam.com, Fabricam.com is part of the SIP URI, and it also needs to be added as an accepted domain in the Exchange organization. So isn't going to take calls for Fabricam.com until and unless it sees Fabricam.com in those accepted domains. And if you recall back to the bit of the demo where I got the pop-up saying that Contoso.com wasn't an accepted domain, that's what would happen if you didn't have an accepted domain. You add domains. You start off in Office 365 with a third-level domain like fabricam.onmicrosoft.com. If you want to import Fabricam.com as an accepted domain, you do that through the Office 365 configuration tools. And you've got to own the DNS record for the accepted domain. Okay. Also, the routing domain is what enables Online to identify the customer. So every customer in Office 365, their calls are going to come to us through the same Lync edge server pool. So this is way of demultiplexing that traffic. And then if you want to have pilot numbers for people to call into for Outlook voice access, or you want to set up auto attendance, then as you would if you were running on your own premises, you need to create a contact object for Lync and add an E164 number to it. And this is what's different. You need to associate the contact with the hosted voicemail policy, because after all, anybody who calls that number from Lync is going to want to go to Online. So this is covered in the Lync documentation. Lastly, the Fabricam administrator enables the user's mailboxes, as I did before. Little side note, not only does this write EUM proxy addresses, which happens on-prem. If you go and look at the proxy addresses, this is how Lync knows the users are enabled on customer premises. But it also sets a new value, which is called MSEXCHUC voicemail settings. If you look in Active Directory schema, both Exchange and Lync 2010 will actually add that to the schema when you install them in the organization. If you're using a hybrid Exchange deployment where there is a modicum of back sync from the directory online to the customer premises directory, that attribute will actually be synchronized back to Fabricam's Active Directory on-premise. And so the fact that you enabled the user online, in the cloud as it were, percolates back to Fabricam if they're using the hybrid deployment model. If not, then it doesn't, and you have to do an extra step, which I have on this slide. So having enabled them online, for each of these users, the Fabricam Lync administrator, if they haven't already done so, needs to enable that user for enterprise voice. They need to associate that user with the hosted voicemail policy. That can be a no-op if the hosted voicemail policy applies to a site or a forest in which the user object exists. And then if that setting wasn't being backsynced from the cloud, they actually need manually to do one more step, which is to set a flag saying enable hosted voicemail to be true. So just associating with the policy isn't enough. You also need to set that flag. But that's it. So it's actually not particularly complicated. So you can see that for both the non-Lync and Lync setups, a lot of the steps are essentially the same, or they have the same intent. We did try and streamline the administration for Lync a bit, though, and simplify it. All right, let's talk now about the operation, feature comparisons. So the executive summary is that the feature set for Exchange whether you're running Exchange 2010 SP1 yourself on your own premises, or whether you have an Office 365 E3 plan subscription, is the same, with a couple of exceptions. Of course, there have to be a couple of exceptions. For the users, the only difference they will notice is that there's no speech access to the directory if they're online. So this means, for example, if you're in Outlook Voice Access and you say directory, we'll transition into touch tone mode and you have to spell the names. It also means that commands like find messages from Michael Wilson, which work in on-premises aren't actually present in the online version yet. We support speech access to everything else in Outlook Voice Access. You get speech access to personal contacts, calendar, personal distribution list, all those good things, just not speech access to the directory. It also means that we don't have speech-enabled auto-attendants at the moment in Office 365 We provide automated attendants, but they're touch-tone automated attendants, so callers need to spell the name or enter the extension number. And that's it. Those are all of the user level or caller level differences. For administrators, the most obvious thing is that you don't get to see server objects anymore. So administrators who are used to thinking about server objects won't see them because this is a shared environment where the servers aren't visible. So things like get server or get active calls or test connectivity, which are commandlets that all rely on you specifying a server name, don't exist in the PowerShell for the online administrator. Instead, we provide something called the troubleshooting tool. There's another hyperlink there, which is actually PowerShell-based, which provides diagnostics, and actually more advanced diagnostics than the previous commandlets. So it's really intended for people who want to do serious troubleshooting for on-prem or online Exchange Control Panel, as I showed you, provides the administration UI if you're online. Again, if you're running a hybrid deployment and you're using Exchange Management Console, that will actually allow you to administer through Exchange Management Console, but that requires you also to have an Exchange organization on your own premises. So that would be part of your organization is online and part is on-prem. If all of your mailboxes are online, if all of your Exchange org is online, then you'll use ECP or possibly PowerShell to administer Online does not send SIP options pings back to on-premises equipment, so don't expect to see anything coming from our service to tell you whether your SBC's up and running or not. Let me talk a little bit now about migration of enabled mailboxes. Let's suppose that you're a customer who's running Exchange yourself and you want to move some or all of those mailboxes online. What do you have to do? Do you have to disable them and re-enable them? So we did what we could to simplify this process. We realized that typically, whether you move someone's mailbox online or put it back on premises, you won't be changing the telephony arrangements in the sense that it would be crazy for us to expect the phone number to change. In fact, we assume that the phone number is going to stay the same unless you tell us otherwise. So you don't need to tell us anything about the numbering when you do the migration, unless you want to make it some kind of an exception. Now, how convenient it is going to depend on how you do the migration. There are three kinds of migration, and the terminology has changed a bit over the last 12 to 18 months, but I believe we've converged now on simple migration, staged migration, and hybrid, which used to be called rich coexistence. So if what you want to do is to migrate already enabled mailboxes without manually having to re-enable them when they get to the cloud, you have to use the hybrid method. That will automatically enable the mailboxes for you after they've moved. You don't have to do it again, which is kind of convenient. If you're using a simple or staged migration, unfortunately, you have to re-enable them after the move. Similarly, the pin will be reset if you do a simple migration or a staged migration. After you've re-enabled that user, they'll have to enter a new pin, which is slightly tiresome. If you're using hybrid model, they don't have to reset the pin. They continue using the same pin. Create additional pilot number and PBX hunt group. Well, here it seems to be, that seems like a bad thing. You don't necessarily want to have to do that because that's more trouble. But actually, you do have to do that if you're in the hybrid mode or you're doing a staged migration where at some time you're going to have users who are enabled both on your premises and in the online service. And the reason is that you need to have different dial plans. We can't have one dial plan cover both on-premises and online. An online dial plan relates to users with mailboxes online. If you've got users with mailboxes on your own premises, you have to have on your own premises and have a dial plan there. And they'll each have different pilot numbers. However, if you're doing a simple migration, if you're doing in a weekend, you take 100 mailboxes and you migrate them, well, it's not unreasonable for you to actually reuse the same pilot number. You don't have to create a new pilot number or PBX hunt group. You just cut over. Of course, it's going to be difficult to do this if people are trying to use the system at the time, so you probably want to do it at a quiet time. But we don't require you to actually create a new pilot number if you're doing simple migration. And all methods do what you would expect and hope, which is to migrate all of the voice messages, all of the greetings and call answering rules, and the recorded name. So those get migrated in either direction. By default, mailbox policies are mapped to mailbox policies with the same name. So if you have a mailbox policy called Very Important Person Policy in your on-premises environment, and you create one called Very Important Person Policy online, then we will automatically map users who have been enabled under that policy to the same named policy online when you move them. If you want to move them to a different policy, or you want to map multiple policies on-prem to one policy online, you can do that as well. International availability. So we're not going to be able to offer in all countries in which Exchange Online is available in Office 365. In some cases, I'm not a lawyer, but my legal advisors tell me that in-country regulation and legislation may prohibit the service or require us to jump through some additional hoops that so far we have not done. Research is in progress and will continue as Office 365 expands, and obviously we want to make as widely available as possible. We apply the restrictions at the user level. We realize that many organizations have users that are based in different countries. So to be specific, the important quantity is the country of origin field, which is essentially the country of the user's business address. And that's what we check when you try and enable the mailbox for We say, in effect, okay, they want to enable Michael for What is his country of origin? Is that on this list? If it's not on the list, we're not going to allow enabling the mailbox. So here are this is not an eye chart, incidentally. The good news is that all of the countries that I'm pretty sure that folks in this room are going to care about are on the list. There are some exceptions, and I used to present the list of exceptions, but to put a more positive note on, I put the 65 countries in which is available in Office 365 at the moment in this table, and we do hope to expand. Now, in the remaining 15 minutes, and I would like some time for questions, I'm going to go very quickly through something that's going to seem rather complicated. And the reason I'm going to do this is because we have already found that some customers in the beta and partners have been trying to second-guess the system by doing crafty things with their SBCs and gateways. Remember, I told you that when you go off and make a query for gwid.outlook.com or exap.outlook.com, it will come back with a number of IP addresses. So the question is, can you somehow use that information to your advantage or make things more reliable? I'm going to try and convince you that you should not do that. Okay, so here is a Contoso user again, and the Contoso user has a mailbox, and that Contoso user's mailbox is in a particular site here that I've called A1. So we have two data centers, Data Center 1 and Data Center 2, imaginatively named. Each of those has an SBC at the edge. And you notice that the forests, the capacity forests, are stretched across sites in different data centers. So this is the standard Exchange Online design, where we have the DAGs that are actually stretched across sites in different data centers for site resiliency. And of course, in each region, is going to be operating in multiple sites and multiple data centers. So this is a deliberate oversimplification, but I'm going to show you now what represents kind of the nightmare scenario for call routing with where we have the indirection via that fully qualified domain name and for some reason, by chance, we take the worst possible set of choices. And I want to convince you that, firstly, this is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, even though this is worst case. So first thing that happens is that a call arrives at the Contoso PBX for the user. They don't answer, and it gets forwarded on ring no answer to the SBC, possibly via a voice over IP gateway. The SBC, of course, has got a forwarding rule that tells it to send all calls to some guid.um.outlook.com. So it goes to DNS and looks that up, and it finds the IP addresses of the online SBCs in the region. That's what it gets. It may not know it. And it just sends the call to one of those through some load balancing algorithm of its own. So let's say it goes to that SBC in data center 1. Could be, in the example I gave you, a more concrete example, assume that's the data center in Illinois or the data center in Texas. Let's say it went to the one in Illinois. So then that SBC internally makes a DNS call on our internal DNS, and it gets the addresses of all of the network load balancers that are used for in that region. And here you can see there are 4 of them, one in each site. I've drawn it, and therefore 4 across 2 sites and 2 data centers. And it sends the call to one of them and actually goes to another data center. So the network load balancer then sends the call on to an active server in the site, because it does a lookup and says, OK, so here are some addresses I should send the call to. And the server then finally receives the call and sees that it's destined for an organization with this globally unique ID. So it goes to the configuration, which are actually in its own capacity forest, and says, OK, tell me where to find Contoso, because I have a call for what I believe to be a Contoso user. And Active Directory says, I don't know who Contoso are. I've never seen this GUID before. So then the server, which would otherwise be stuck, goes to organization provisioning information, which is actually outside the forests, and says, OK, tell me which forest I should send this call to, given that the call is for this tenant, Contoso. So here's a globally unique ID. Give me a forest ID. That information comes back, and then the server sends a redirect all the way back to the on-premises SBC saying, please don't talk to me, please talk to this other address. So first redirection. Contoso's SBC dutifully then sends the call to this new address, forest ID, and it's actually followed by um.prod.outlook.com. The SBC, same SBC, then uses DNS to resolve this new address, forestid.um.prod.outlook.com. This time it gets just 2 addresses, and these are the IP addresses of the load balancers in the correct forest. Of course, what happens? Well, it picks the site that is not the one with the active mailbox, so it now sends the call to the wrong site in the right forest. So the load balancer sends the call to one of the servers in the site. It goes and takes a look at the certificate now to see whether the CN in the certificate, remember that should be sbc.contoso.com or whatever, actually matches the place that the call is coming from. And having satisfied itself that this is a genuine call from a genuine tenant, it sends the call to the worker process on the same server. The worker process discovers that the user's mailbox is actually in the other site. So it then redirects back to the SBC and says, don't talk here, talk to some site id.um.prod.outlook.com. So back on premises, Contoso's SBC sends the call now to site id.um.prod.outlook.com, and finally, it just gets the load balancers in that site. And actually, there's only one of them in this diagram, and that sends the call to a server in the site. And finally, is in the right site, in the right forest for this user's mailbox, and it's able to answer the call, negotiate the media, open the mailbox, play the greeting, and do all those good things. And that may have happened when I did that call to my number in Redmond. It may or may not have happened. It's actually very difficult to tell because the actual additional round trip time that's imposed by these redirections is very modest. I mean, within a ring cycle, typically. So you don't notice. So why am I telling you all this, apart from, I don't wish to boast about the data center topology and site resiliency. You know that we have these things. I'm telling you this because I'm saying it's a bad idea to try and game that system. The idea of putting this indirection in and putting that GUID and not exposing the forest topology or the site topology or the server topology is precisely so that we don't have to ask you guys to go and reconfigure your SBCs if we have a failover, or if your mailbox gets moved to a different site, or if the data center is taken out by a meteorite. In theory, and in practice, we believe, and we have good evidence to back this up, the site resiliency will ensure that, yes, there may be an outage in some of these terrible scenarios where the service takes a few minutes to fail over completely, but you won't have to reconfigure your on-premises equipment to have calls keep going through to Online in the steady state. And that's very important. So by trying to game the system, by going off and finding the IP addresses and trying to find the IP address that's got the shortest round-trip time and then programming that in, for example, the only thing that you're doing is setting yourself up for some reconfiguration further down the line. And if your idea of happiness is to send SIP options pings in the hope that a server is going to respond to them, I mean, bear in mind that it will respond to them, but all you're doing really is adding additional traffic to the network that's not really going to help you over time to get a more available service. We are supposed to manage the SLA for you, and if you try and game the system, all you'll be doing is putting additional traffic on the network to no good end. So let me summarize, and then take some questions. So Exchange in Office 365 is there. It's available now. It's in the beta. So we have Exchange Unified Messaging available as software and as an online service. The features are almost identical. You have to have dial tone. We don't bring that. So you have to provide dial tone at the moment from your own premises with Link or a compatible PBX and maybe a gateway and definitely a session border controller. And it's available to users in most of the countries offering Office 365. There are some related sessions that I put in there. There's for those who are interested, we now support virtualization of if you're running it on your own premises. I'd encourage you to read that white paper. And please, please, please complete an evaluation. I do need to know whether we need to change the pitch of this session if we give it again. And I would very much value your feedback. And with that, thank you, and I'll take questions.
Can you have organizations that are on Office 365 have both Link and IPPBX connections?
So the question was on a microphone. So the answer is yes, you can. What you need to do is to create a dial plan for Link and a dial plan for the IPPBX. And you might wind up having multiple dial plans, but yes, you can.
Right, okay, thanks.
Any other question? Was that useful? Does it demystify the system a bit?
I have one question. How do I connect an organization that is only mobile phone? What benefits do I get from SIP runs or sending text messages, or what can I do?
So that's a great question. So the question was, what about organizations who have users who are mobile phones only? So I don't have a great answer for you at the moment because everything that I've shown you here relates to customers who have PBXs on premise. And so although it would be possible to cheat in a very circuitous way by having a mobile phone forward to a number on premise and have that permanently forwarded to Online, I don't think most customers who have mobile solutions are going to want to do that. So all I can say is we don't have an answer for that particular scenario at the moment that will satisfy you. It's a scenario that we understand is very important, particularly in Europe, and we're going to see more of it. And I hope that we will have a solution in time. It's something that we're actively working on.
What we actually would need is an easy way to send text messages to large people. To many people at the same time. For example, something has been cancelled and you have to get quickly messages to hundreds of people using Link.
Yeah, so we're not actually, although, so the question was if there is a requirement to send text messages to many people at the same time. So we don't position Exchange Online or Online as an SMS solution. It is true we do have interfaces to SMS, although from the point of view, they're strictly based on SMTP gateways, which are not available in many European countries. We do have ways of sending SMS from phones that are ActiveSync enabled, but again, that doesn't necessarily answer the problem unless you send messages to a distribution list that contains all of the users that you want to reach by SMS, and they all have phones with a version of ActiveSync that will then send SMS based on that message. It is possible, but it doesn't work with every ActiveSync implementation. Again, I think we're interested to hear about customers' requirements for SMS. Particularly, I'm on the Exchange Online side. I'm sure the Lync team are interested as well, and that's something I think we'll see more of over time as well.